Kia ora and welcome to How to Smash the Motherhood Penalty, the podcast where we get curious about a system where all parents pay some kind of a price, but it's only mothers that are paying a financial price. I'm your host, Emma McLean. I'm an executive coach and a mum of three. Join me as I interview experts in all different fields on what the motherhood penalty is, how it impacts us, and what we can do to smash it. Welcome back, it's your friend Emma. Today I am delighted to be interviewing two people. I have with me on the podcast the co-founders of Mobilise, which is a program I want to explore more, Jess Stuart and Joe Consedine. Welcome, Jess and Joe. I want to just introduce you both a little before I hand the mics over to you. Jess Stuart is an international speaker, a coach, and author of 8 personal development books specialising in mindset, equity, and leadership. A senior leader with a background in human resources roles and a decade working in diversity, inclusion, and people development. Businesses find Jess can speak their language. A brush with burnout in her corporate career led Jess across the world to train with Buddhist monks and nuns. Highly acclaimed event speaker and proud member of the Rainbow community, Jess has been featured by TV3, BBC, RNZ, Dominion Post Stuff, and the New Zealand Business Magazine. Described as inspiring, articulate, and relatable by audiences, Jess has a passion for sharing her knowledge and motivating others with her words. Welcome, Jess. I'm very delighted to meet Jess because I have seen her on the LinkedIn a lot. So it's very exciting for me to meet her. And welcome to Joe. Joe is a repeat offender on the podcast. He has been on before. Joe has previously worked at Global Woman. He's currently working at ANZ in a key diversity and inclusion role. He is a dad who's just had a year 12 ball. So we have just been talking about that. And welcome, Joe.
Great to be here, Emma.
I thought I would just throw it over to you individually first because I have briefly introduced you. But if there's anything else you would like to share with my listeners, I would be very, very open to that. So kia ora, Jess. Welcome. Anything else you would like my listeners to know about you?
Kia ora, Emma. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you. I think one of the big aha moments for me is I always worked in HR in my career, and I could see so many inequities in terms of the talented people in our organizations, the leadership, the career trajectory, and so many different experiences, and that was often gendered. And that kind of ignited my passion when I stepped away from that career to write books about the subject and to support women in the leadership space. And then I had this big aha moment a couple of years ago where I realized that whilst we need to support women and underrepresented groups in our workplaces, there's a whole majority, particularly of our leadership, that is not women. So very male-dominated leadership still. And so started chatting to Joe about the other side of the coin. How do we get them involved in the conversation and play an allyship role? Because women and underrepresented groups are just not going to be able to do this on their own, and nor should they, right? We shouldn't be carrying the weight of the problems we are experiencing and trying to fix them at the same time. So that's how Mobilise came around.
It's so true, right? Like sometimes parts of the solution to things that we all want to see are not necessarily the direct route. You know what I mean? Like there has to be this support that's around. I'm going to love to hear more about that coming up. I'd love to introduce Joe again. Anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we kick in?
Well, similar to Jess in terms of aha moments for me, but very different in terms of my own lived experience. I think my career has spanned the first part of it quite traditional, kind of corporate, a career in leadership and strategy and financial services. And I was always very aware leading teams and particularly leading functions that were looking to drive innovation, this need for a whole lot of voices to be at the table in order to be successful and to create new ideas. And so I got really interested in that. And then when I made the big leap out of corporate into diversity and inclusion in a full-time capacity, it was very obvious to me the next horizon of diversity and inclusion and success within our workplaces and communities needed to unite rather than divide. And being a white male myself, I could see the world through my own perspective, obviously, that a lot of men were really struggling with the concepts around diversity and inclusion, and particularly how it was being enacted into organizations. And it was really clear that we needed to create some safe space for men to ask some of those questions, which they're probably talking about outside of work, and that the solutions were to be found through this move to unity rather than division. It just felt like we had hit a kind of a period where we had stagnated, where when all of the energy and resources went into and asked to Jess's point, the underrepresented groups to solve the problems and the barriers that they're facing in the system, we're only going to make so much progress. And I'm impatient. I'm not willing to wait for that. I've got a real personal drive around equity, both in workplaces and more broadly in the community and economically. And so that was the big aha moment. How might we move from this kind of division and focused attention and resource allocation into our underrepresented groups, which is still important. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's an and or, I think it's an and. Into this drive for unity and this corridor that we can start having around that power isn't a zero-sum game, that we aren't asking anyone to kind of give up their position. We're asking them to create space for other people and kind of redefine success in a lot of ways, particularly for men.
Amazing. Yeah, the next horizon is unity. It's not a zero-sum game. All of that I'm in violent agreement with. I want to talk about Mobilise. Many of our listeners might not know what Mobilise is, but I want to step back. How did you and Jess connect and have this idea for Mobilise? And what is Mobilise, please?
I can answer the first part of the question and then I might throw it to Joe for the second part, because it was an idea. It was actually a mentor of mine challenged me. I'd worked in rooms full of women for the last decade and I love it. And a mentor of mine challenged me about, well, what if you totally flipped that on its head and worked in rooms full of men? And at the time I said, oh God, no. I don't know if I can do that. And then I sat with it and I thought about the impact it would have. And yeah, it just grew on me. And then my wife came home one day from a conference. She'd been to a diversity conference and she said, and I've never heard her say this about any man before, she said, there's a guy that spoke today I think you'd really like. You and him are on the same page. And it turned out to be Joe. So I hit Joe up and said, hey, next time I'm in Wellington, do you want a coffee? And we just kind of got chatting. And obviously we've got a lot of common ground. We shared the same kind of values and the same drive and passion for this kind of work. And I said, well, I've got this idea, but I know I can't do it alone. And I'm looking for someone to partner with. And so the idea was born at that point. And we sort of then got excited and started dreaming about what it could look like and the impact it could make. But I was very conscious as a woman that if I did this by myself, there would be things that I cannot say to the men in the room without it feeling like they're under attack. And of course, Joe, because he looks and sounds like them and has had a similar experience to them, it just deepens the conversation, having that co-facilitation of kind of, me and Joe in the room. So that's kind of how it was born. And yeah, I'll leave it to you, Joe, to finish off kind of how it grew from there, what it became.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things for me in terms of a learning is when you have a purpose and put your energy out there and kind of put that purpose out to the universe, amazing collaborators come into your world. And I'm incredibly grateful to be working with Jess. And you would have heard her bio in terms of how amazing she is and how much I've learnt, on a daily basis around facilitation, around how to design a learning and programs which is going to have an impact. So I want to start with that. But yeah, it's just been this real true collaboration around how we bring ideas to the table. I think one of the things that we have, to Jess's point, having a man and a woman as co-facilitators, is that we naturally bring different perspectives to our work, both to the facilitation, but also to the design elements. I remember a funny thing that happened early on, like we were kind of putting slide decks together around proposals or things like that. And the ones that I was putting together were like really masculine. They were like dark backgrounds and like capital letters and stuff like that. And Jess was like, this is really funny because my slides have like got flowers and stuff like that on them, and yours have like got block letters on dark. And so that's kind of like a bit of a metaphor for the different perspectives and styles that we bring, both in terms of working together, but also I think the real magic is in the workshops around how, when it's needed, Jess can articulate back to the men in the room her lived experience of being a woman in a leadership position, her career, right from her childhood, around what the behavioral norms or the gender norms were around the career counselor and how that kind of actually plays out for women. And then I can look men directly in the eye and challenge them about some of the behaviors which go on in our workplace, if we're honest, around gendered norms and male leadership roles and things like that. So yeah, it was, the genesis of it was, how might we build this unity? Like, how might we help make this shift from division to unity? And how might we create a space where that can be allowed to happen, and particularly with a non-preachy voice? You know, because I think that's another piece of feedback that I've had and have experienced, is that men go into diversity and inclusion labeled training or workshops or talks with their armor on, being prepared to be told that they're to blame, that they have privilege, that they're holding on to positions of power, that they're being selfish, that, you know, all of these sorts of things. And so immediately kind of switch off to any reflection around, well, what's my role in this? What's my why? How might I lean into this without fear? And so that was a big design principle that we kind of established really early on, was psychological safety for this kaupapa was really important in order to authentically kind of create the change that we had this vision for.
Amazing. So much in that. But also, if I was going to summarize the genesis, it would be matchmaking by Jess's wife and the universe.
Go Patrice.
So I'm gonna distill it down there, okay? What is Mobilise? What is it?
So we call it an allyship program for men. However, we do plenty of sessions that are mixed genders in the room as well. And we do sessions with executive leadership teams that are more about leadership development. So as a leader, how do I develop my inclusive capabilities to be a better leader for the future? And I think Joe and I have kind of got it down to this fine art that we see working really well. And it's got this 3 parts. It's the context, what is changing in the world, how are our demographies changing, not just across Aotearoa, but the world as well. And how does that reflect in our customer base, our client base? And therefore, how do we attract not just talent, but business from these changing communities and stay ahead and keep up? And then there's a big space where we open up a corridor for particularly men in the room to actually get some stuff off their chest and go, well, actually, I've wanted to be an ally, but I'm worried about leaning into this space and getting it wrong or offending people. Or actually, I'm not even at that stage because I'm feeling under attack right now. And there's some things I need to get off my chest before I can get to the space where I'm ready to be an ally. That whole kind of scarcity piece of, am I going to lose out? And so having that corridor has been so impactful for people in the room. And then we've got this 3-step framework that we take leaders through that helps tool them up really with inclusive capabilities, helps people understand what good allyship look like. And some really easy, we're big on saying it's the small things that make the biggest difference. And if it's not small, busy leaders are not going to do it. So what are the small things that will make the biggest difference that they can go away and do right away? And I think one of my favorites, and one we always get a lot of impact with when leaders do their feedback, is getting them to just observe power dynamics in a meeting. So look at who's got the loudest voice, who's being spoken over, who doesn't get the airtime, and they have some real aha moments. And it is often, it's either people culturally that are more introverted, or women, or both, who are the people being spoken over. And it's the majority groups that tend to have the loudest voice in the room. And when people realize that and become aware of that, there's this big aha moment of, oh, I had no idea that that was happening. So it's part awareness, part education, part practical leadership development skills. And really, we're all about tooling leaders up for the future. So future-proofing them so that they can be better leaders for the future, because leadership has changed and continues to do so. But of course, the byproduct of that is that it's better for everyone. so male leaders can navigate the new world well, and all of the women that they not just work with but live with get to benefit from those allyship skills as well.
Joe, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. I think the success of it has been the mix of challenge and safety. So we're quite, we want to create a safe space for men to be open and ask the questions that they are actually having down at the pub or at the dinner party, and they haven't felt safe asking in the workplace. But also it's a real call to action. Like our version or our description of allyship is that it's a verb, it's a doing word. A bit like the difference between kind of mentoring and sponsorship, where sometimes mentoring can be kind of passive. It's nice conversations and saying the right things, but sponsorship asks the person to do something, to actively create space for other people. And so that's a big part of it, creating the space to get a few things off your chest and then go, okay, what does it look like? What does it look like on a day-to-day basis, right to Jess's point, in meetings, right through to recruitment, through to strategy building, creating workplace cultures, all of those things that we're struggling with. Because I think, from what we've learned through this program, with hundreds of men going through this program, is that leadership has changed, and there's a discomfort in that, particularly from male leaders who have really put all of their stocks in their technical kitty, in their basket of knowledge, and men are really overrepresented in the most technical professions that we have around engineering and technology and some of the professional services functions. And all of a sudden, if you're a people leader now in a modern Aotearoa, you are leading multiple cultures and ethnicities, intergenerational ages, geographically dispersed teams, and all of a sudden the actual capabilities that organizations are looking for are beyond technical. And then you overlay AI into that in terms of how that's going to take out a lot of the technical functions from those professions. Organizations are desperate for human leaders who can create spaces for high performance, for all of these different perspectives to be seen and heard and valued and sought out in decision making. So yeah, a big part of it, and just made that point, was actually future-proofing leadership. We often say this is an allyship or an inclusive leadership program, but actually it's about leadership development. It's about high-performance leadership for the future, because this is the reality of our workplaces now and into the future, around how we manage change, how we adapt to our changing stakeholder expectations, how we drive performance.
Yeah. When, as Jess was talking, Joe, I was thinking this is a high performance leadership program, right? Or not even program, experience. A thing that helps you to reflect and equip for the leadership we all need to bring to the changing workplace, environment, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds epic. I actually met Joe in real person the other day, which is amazing because I've known him for about 3 years online. And it's a bit like, like Snuffleupagus was Big Bird's best friend, but no one ever saw him. So, but I actually saw you and I could give you a hug, which was nice. But we were at a male allyship event, and one of the ideas there was for us to all like actively sponsor someone, right? Actively sponsor someone at work into a new role. When you're in a meeting, that you actively say, Jess can do this role, we should appoint her, or Jess needs to be in this meeting, or whatever. And I said to Joe, what's in it for a man to do that? Like, why would they want to do that? What's in it for them? And what would you both say to that question? Like, what's in it for them to be an active ally for women?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer it, because not being a man, I have no idea what their motivation would be, right? For this. I mean, what we hear from the men in the room is that often their why and their motivation comes from things like, I just want to be a good person in the world. This is the right thing to do. Or I have a daughter or a granddaughter. I want the world to be better when they grow up. Or actually the why is more about my personal brand. So this is good for me. This makes me a better leader because of how this is perceived. And this is what great leaders do. They're the sort of things that I hear, but I'm sure there's stuff under the surface in terms of that inner motivation that Joe probably knows more about, having spent way more time with men than I do.
Yeah, I'm a believer that the kind of motivation, or there's the intrinsic motivation around this, has to be twofold. It has to be, one, I want to do the right thing, and you know that I've got a daughter and I've got a granddaughter, and it's part of my values. But I don't think that's enough, and I think that's a big part of the kind of conversation about diversity and inclusion too. If we're just doing something because it's the right thing, like and going and preaching at people to say this is the most morally virtuistic position that you should be taking, it just doesn't land with people. Like people go, oh, don't come and tell me what the most morally virtuistic kind of thing is to do. You have to, and I think this is something that we haven't done well in the diversity and inclusion movement regarding men, is develop a value proposition for them to lean in and actually participate, right? It's kind of been, come along if you like to the International Women's Day breakfast, and then they kind of tiptoe around the edges and feel a bit awkward kind of going to it. The real change happens, and the ones that I see really kind of getting it is understanding that doing things like this, sponsoring people, creating inclusive spaces, is actually good for their own future career and brand, because these are the practices which are in demand and will get noticed, for future promotions and things like that, because people will observe that person looking to adopt some of those practices with a view for high performance. So we need that woman's voice at this table, because I think we'll make better decisions if we have more diverse perspectives. We need more Māori and Pacifica around our tables, because their worldviews and their perspectives and their cultural values will help us innovate and do that. And so part of it is that values alignment piece, because I think you always have to have that. You want to be doing the right thing, but also it's about, and the organizations that are doing this well are embedding these behaviors into their performance management, into their leadership capability frameworks, into their recruitment processes. So it's the leaders who we are going to promote and reward and recognize, who are the ones that we observe and witness being an inclusive leader on a day-to-day basis. And so the ones who are doing it really well have clicked onto that to go, hey, I'm a good person. And Jess and I would kind of describe this as a bell curve inside organizations, that you kind of have 10% of your male workforce regarding diversity and inclusion quite conservative and anti and not really interested, and you kind of butt up against them in a lot of these kind of conversations. And then there's a 10% on the other side who are really active allies and sponsors and get involved in the employee-led networks and et cetera, et cetera. But the middle all have the values alignment. Like the majority of the men that we have in our workshops are going, hey, I really want to learn more about this. I do want to do better. I just need this extra kind of support and framework and education to give me the confidence to really step forward into my inclusive leadership. So if we can move the majority of that bell curve to the right, then I think we'll really create more equitable outcomes for everyone. So the short answer is it's part values, but part the model of the future of work and future of leadership is really around equitable leadership, inclusive leadership, because that's going to drive the innovation and the change, agility, and adaptation that our organizations are desperately needing in this kind of crazy world and disrupted world that we're living through.
I love that, and I love the bell curve description that you and Jess use as well, because I think if we talk about that middle there, and I talk about this with my work, is that you have, for change to work, people need to be open to it to start off with. And then they're kind of listening and they're curious. And then it's just being able to equip them with some, as you say, small little things that will have a big impact, or little different ways of being. And, I interviewed Aidan Kirk-Smith, who has started a business called Dad Venture, and he's supporting dads. And one of the themes he's noticed with his dads is that this is just a small slice of their life, but they want to be useful at home, but they don't know what useful is. And I thought it was quite a good observation, because I feel like that could be the same at work. It's like, I want to be, you know what I mean? It's like, I want for our work to be different, well, what can I do? Like, what is it that I will be doing? Like, what are some of the small things that, if we have men listening to this, that they could just start doing?
I think one of the conversation we're really keen on having is that men are actually part of the solution in this space. And I think many of them are made to feel like part of the problem. And that is, therein lies the problem, right? And we're always often saying that this is a commercial conversation rather than a social good one. Or, of course, that's an outcome as well. And I think those two things help get them to the table. But the benefit is when they leave that table with those practical things that they can do. So we're always saying one of the big things, well, there's two really. There's understanding who they are, so what shaped their experience of the world, how they've been brought up, how their sort of worldview has been shaped, understanding their own leadership brand and what makes them tick, so that they're there in a position to understand the experience of others, because it's our experience that particularly leaders that have a grounded confidence and are comfortable in their own skin are much more able to welcome difference or leave space for different voices. And it's those that don't have that grounded confidence and are not comfortable in their own skin that see that as a threat. And so the first step is getting comfortable in your own skin and understanding yourself. And then I think the big thing for this is just understanding that your experience is not necessarily everybody else's. And I think so often as humans, regardless of our gender, we think the world is as we see it, and yet we're all seeing it differently. And so the big aha moment is often for men in the room to understand the experience of women, for example, or of other underrepresented groups. And often we'll hear them say things like, I had no idea that happened. When we've got big groups of people at conferences and things, we'll get people to put their hand up as we say, you know, have you ever, and then reel something off. And one of the things we'll often do if people have traveled for a conference is how many people put something up against the hotel door last night when you went to sleep. And of course, a lot of the women in the room will raise their hand, and the men are looking around like, what the hell? I didn't even know that was a thing. And then all of a sudden there's that aha moment that I've got a wife and I had no idea that happened. And there's all these experiences that people in my workforce and my team are having that I just don't know about. And so it sparks a curiosity. And we often say, if you want to start small, just look at the podcasts that you're listening to, the movies you watch, the books you read. And if they're all made by people that look and sound like you, there's a really good opportunity to understand an experience different to your own by following some different people. And it starts super small, you know, just getting alongside people in your organization as well that might have weaker networks or are new to the team, or perhaps we gravitate towards people that look like us, particularly at Friday night drinks, and, our mates, the people we're comfortable with. But if we go alongside other people and have the same conversations, hey, what are you up to at the weekend? Tell me about yourself. We get to learn different experiences other than the ones we already know about because they're the ones we're having.
I love that. I love that. You can look at us on a few different levels, and I love those practical ones. Like, and if I was going to summarize all of that, Jess, it's be curious. Be curious about yourself and how you are landing right here. And I know that sounds all woo-woo for people, but it works. And then be curious about others, and be curious about others' lived experience. And that is just basic, great life advice. So I love that. What would you add to that, Joe?
Well, one of the other things that always creates a lot of engagement within the workshop is around talking about being an upstander, not a bystander. That around intervening into poor behavior or banter, as we might like to call it. And in male environments, this is always on. The way that we use humor, which often has an underlying misogyny or racism element to it, if we're honest, and particularly in male-only environments. And that's been something which is, people often will come up and want to talk about that more, but not just relating to the workplace, relating to, social environments or, time out of work, and what are some of the strategies to actually decide, firstly, to become an upstander and not a bystander, and then how to go about that. And so that's been a big one around how to do that. And firstly, that decision to do that, to stop turning a blind eye to poor behavior because of how toxic it can be inside the workplace and how it can really impact other people.
I like that, be an upstander, not a bystander. And I listened to Cara Swisher, who has a podcast with Scott Galloway, who I like, but is quite challenging. And she had Mel Robbins on the podcast the other day, and she said to Mel, how should I handle Scott? Like, how should I handle some of the inappropriate things he says? And Mel said, well, if someone says something that, is not right, but you don't want to make a big thing out of it, what you could say is can you repeat that? And she said they will never repeat it the same. What would you guys say? Like, how can you be an upstander? If someone says, oh, great, Annabelle's got the CEO role just because she's a girl. Or I don't know, like, what would you say? What's something we could say that would sort of spark someone's curiosity rather than felt like their hand's been smacked?
And it is a skill. So we often don't go into a very prescriptive, because it's very
Right.
it's very contextual.
Yeah.
Because it depends on the situation, it depends on the power dynamics that are happening in that space. And so we talk about building your intervention muscle and starting small. So starting with your mates at home or
Yeah.
whatever, and just practice and see what lands well. If you
Yeah.
can, and it has to be authentic to you as well, to your own
Yes.
communication style. Like if you're naturally, you've got a great sense of humor like you do, Emma, humor will work, but it can't. And because people will pick up on the underlying message behind that, because
Yeah.
you don't want to be going around everywhere waving your arms around and telling people off, because that won't engage them
Well,
either, and it's not
it
very
doesn't
constructive.
work.
No.
Yeah.
And so it has to be a respectful communication. But yeah, I think that our advice is always to build your intervention muscle, start small, in safe spaces like with your friends and things like that. And then as you develop your kind of upstander confidence, you can start bringing that into the workplace and into professional environments where it's a slightly trickier kind of environment in that. But I think the first decision is the biggest hurdle to get over, to say, hey, I'm going to be an upstander. And I'm going to start small, start practicing, build my own confidence, build my own style, and you'll get it wrong and that won't land, and that'll be important to your growth and being an upstander, and you'll start getting it right, and then kind of keep evolving that so that you can be an effective upstander in the workplace too.
I love that. So build your upstander muscle, and it will look different for everyone, just like all our muscles are different. And have a growth mindset with it. Sometimes you'll kick yourself that you said nothing, and sometimes you'll say something and you'll think, oh, okay, I'm kind of proud of myself. So I love that. What about you, Jess? What would you add to that?
Oh, I think I would add to Mel's advice by saying one of the other good things in the face of that is just to that naive inquiry, just to go, oh, that's interesting. You think that? Can you explain that to me? Because, you're obviously giving them the impression this isn't making sense to me. And particularly for something like that, they'll then go on to say something like, well, every CEO role at the minute gets filled by a woman. And then you're like, oh, really? Is that true? And then they're like, no, actually, there are more CEs on the NZX50 named Mark than there are women. And so they start to then kind of unravel their own argument with that introspection and that naive inquiry. And it doesn't feel like they're under attack. You're simply going, oh, really? Can you explain that to me? And then they realize they can't explain it. And then all of a sudden there becomes this realization that, oh, that's actually not the fact. That's just my opinion. And where does that come from? And you start scratching below the surface of that. And then it often comes down to this fear and scarcity. I feel as a male that I'm going to lose out in the next top job to a woman because of the move to make workplaces more inclusive. And so that's behind it, not the actual whatever comes out of their mouth.
Yeah. I love that, Jess. This naive kind of inquiring mind, like a beginner's mindset, right? And I think for me to be able to do that, I really need to practice mindfulness and not get triggered by the comment. Do you know what I mean? Like that you can then say, okay, I know some tools to do that, because if the comment triggers you, then you become I can become very defensive. And I can say, well, that's not even true, actually. Shut up. I wouldn't say that, but do you know what I mean? But that's because that doesn't actually get you anywhere. You have to be mindful and bring this kind of naive, inquiring mind. And also, I think that even if you don't feel like it's landed with the person, I always think sometimes they walk away thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the purpose, right? Just to sow the seed. And you're so
Yeah.
right about our own intention and approaches. I mean, Joe and I get plenty of practice at this in the workshop.
Yeah.
You know, the amount of times we get people raise things like, but is there really a gender pay gap though? And, you know, diversity hires mean that warships end up sinking. And, you know, those kind of things that, you know, we get very good at, you know, being that person that can hold the space and allow them to have the conversation in a way that they can come to a different conclusion rather than, you know, it takes a lot of emotional regulation because, like you say, sometimes your first response is, oh my God, that's ridiculous. And but if we start there, we lose the moment and the opportunity to help open their minds up to another way, a different opinion, and some more factual, shall we say, anecdotes to what they've been taught or what they're thinking.
Yeah, and I mean, it feels like when I hear you talk that back, I come right back to the beginning when we talked about we need unity. We can't be in both camps anymore.
Yeah.
So we both need to be unified. So I think that there's a role for everyone, for all genders here. You know, even when we're talking about male allyship, that there's a role for everyone. I've got two kind of last questions. You know, I know that not everyone becomes a parent, and I know that not everyone is a mum. But if there is this thing called the motherhood penalty, which the World Economic Forum says makes up to 80% of the pay gap, what would you both say? Is there a relationship between male allyship and the motherhood penalty? Like, is there a relationship? How could you make a relationship? What's the interconnectedness between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, we would say and talk about this a lot, that allyship isn't just in the workplace; it's at home, and sometimes at home, you know, allyship is that the right framing because that almost reinforces the norm that you're allying the woman, and she's the primary kind of caregiver and doer of jobs around the house, and so a lot of the stuff that we're teaching inside Mobilise is mainly designed for the workplace, but the principles absolutely apply to the home. And so when men are being reflective about their own identity, their own role, the experience of others, they will start to be applying that to their life and their home life. And we've had lots of real reflections for men around definitions of success in life and in their career, and really moving away from this very narrow definition of kind of being the financial provider, the stoic provider to your family, and that being your primary function or primary value that you can bring in. And real sad stories. I was coaching a senior male leader the other day, and I kind of opened up the question, just, you know, how are you going? And he said, oh, awesome, I just bought a new boat. And I was like, oh, cool. How's everything else going? And we got to, I've got a really bad relationship with my wife. Like, my marriage is not going well. I hardly ever see my kids, and I have a poor relationship with them, and they've kind of moved on, and I'm drinking too much, and I'm pretty unhappy. Like, you know, how can that be? And from the outside in, the perspective would be he's really successful, you know, because he's being financially successful and that. But there's this really awful underlying truth around men's mental health and physical health and their ability to develop really strong relationships both at home and with their friends. And so a big part of the message here, and I think what I'm passionate about, is redefining that kind of success criteria for men to be much more holistic than that, which I think when that happens, we'll see much more going on at home, you know, like in terms of spending time in parental leave and having much more equalized care at home, which will be better off for everyone in the workplace. Like, I'd love in the future for care to be redefined as a skill rather than a career gap. When we see career gaps in CVs, we question them, or, you know, that, but actually my experience of being a dad at home with my daughter was I learned so much that I was able to bring back into the workplace to be a much better leader. I learned how to take your ego away and kind of live and lead without your ego. I learned about, being productive and prioritizing different things, all of these skills, learning about not knowing what to do and, and being quite lonely. All of these things that happen in leadership, right? The way you don't know what the answer is, you're feeling lonely, you're, all of that kind of stuff. And those are real development skills, which can be applied absolutely back to high performance leadership when you come back in. So that would be one thing I'd love to see in terms of that redefinition of care. But I mean, the first question is that all of the allyship skills apply not just to the workplace but to home as well, because I think they're obviously intrinsically connected, those two things.
I think there's different perceptions of that though as well, right? Because a guy like Joe can take some time off to bring up their kids or be at the school gates to pick them up, and all of a sudden they're this, amazing modern man doing amazing things, and won't that be great for their career as well? But when a woman does all those things, it's just the expected norm, and it's not an enhanced thing. In fact, sometimes it's a negative. And I think for me, it's just, even for men, just to understand that, there's no such thing as the fatherhood penalty, and therefore that's a problem. And I think a lot of this is societal norms. And yet I still see far too many women who are carrying the mental load, the caregiving support, and the physical workload for too many other people. And of course, that increases when you've got children. And that's at home and at work. So they're carrying the weight for their partners, and they're carrying the weight for so many of their colleagues at work as well. And that's why they're at increased risk of burning out. And I think those societal expectations, a woman will feel like she's failing as a mother if she's not at the gates at 3:00 for the kids, but then she's failing as a C-suite executive if she's not at the 5:00 meeting. And so you can never really win. And that's a societal norm thing. And I know that obviously men suffer the same way from the societal norms around building your identity and your career and your role being a breadwinner. And I think when those two things start to shift so that men become more able to be caregivers, and it's not a negative, and women can let go of some of that mental load and the responsibility that they will hold up and look after everybody else, I think the whole of society becomes a better place. But we're unlearning and relearning centuries of norms and stereotypes, right? So it's a slow process.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, Jess. In my work, when you talk about the motherhood penalty, sometimes, I always have to be very careful when I talk about this with mums and dads, because I want to talk about it in a way that we can bring our curious mind to it, because otherwise we can kind of go into a defensive mind of, well, is it my fault if I'm not a mother? Do you know what I mean? And I just think if we can both be in a place where, it's not you, it's the system. And it's actually pitting us against each other. But now we all know that. And we can take action. And I think, for me, when I think about allyship and I think about what you have both shared today, for me, allyship, whoever we are allying in, I can't even say that word, it's about getting curious about that lived experience of that person. And when we have that curiosity, when we can understand that more, we are able to take different actions, because we understand that not everyone is like me. And that is just the best leadership capability in the world, really. Final question. Yeah, so the motherhood penalty is big. And I see it a lot in my work. I work with mums and dads. And look, dads aren't thriving in the system either. But the reality is money works in our current capitalist society. And mums get penalised with money and retirement savings. What if you had a magic wand? Joe's already had this question, so he's going to go last. But Jess, if you had a magic wand that meant that mothers were not penalised, financially penalised through their salary and through their retirement savings, what would you use that wand for? What's the biggest lever do you think we could in our society pull?
I think it's how we perceive skills, and Joe touched on this before, because I think we perceive kind of caregiving as something separate to the workforce or the kind of economy. And yet when I look at how many transferable skills women, particularly women that have had children, bring into the workplace, It's massive, and yet a lot of that gets overlooked. It's almost like a negative. You've had a year off, but it's not off. It's a year doing a whole new life skill that has brought so many transferable skills that when we start seeing this through a different lens, and again, I think it's those societal norms that work that women do is undervalued. So that's not just childcare, it's nursing, it's teaching, it's all the traditional female type roles. And work that men do, whether it's tech, engineering, anything like that, it's higher priced. And that comes from our societal norms, right? We see that. And of course, if men were the primary caregivers, potentially they'd be paid for it. And that would come at a higher price point. And so that perception of women's work not being as high a value because of those gendered norms, that's the one thing I would like us to change. Because if we did value this work and all women's work, and if women got paid by the hour for everything they have to think about and do for others, we would be the richest gender in the world right now.
Yeah.
And not that I think that, not that I want us to become more rich. I think it's an equity thing, right? It's not an us and them. It's we're all in this together. So let's all be recognized for what we bring to the world and the skills that we have and the difference that we make. Because you'd argue that bringing up the next generation is probably the most important job in the world you can have right now.
Yep. You wouldn't get an argument from me on that. You'd get an agreement. So revaluing, redefining caregiving as skills, as strengths, as critical. So I love that for your magic wand, Jess. Joe, what about you, my friend?
My magic wand would be about equalizing caregiving from the start. Right. So how do we kind of redefine those gender roles from the very start of having your first child? I think in workplaces and our economy, allowing space for that through parental leave policy, through flexibility, through all of the different levers that we have to pull while career breaks are happening. And so taking all of the barriers, the structural barriers away from equalizing caregiving from the very start. And then, that's kind of like the hardwiring. I would call this hardwiring and softwiring. The hardwiring is like all the policy changes, like the flexibility policy, the parental leave policy, your REM policy, the way that you're designing roles inside your organization to be, more sharing, more part-time, because the way that our organizations are structured now is not fit for purpose for the future of work. And we keep, designing roles that drive burnout and actually aren't that effective for individuals to do. And so this is going to require actual innovation within the HR systems to enable this, of which my observation would be there's very little innovation in the people space. We've focused all of our innovation in our organizations around product development and product design, but not in the ways that we're working and the structures of our people roles. And so that needs to totally change, which will then enable, so that's like that kind of hardwiring. But the softwiring is removing the stigma for men in taking parental leave, doing pickups, playing a really, really active role with their kids and with their family and with their partner. And, so that's the kind of how we need to change our mindset alongside the policy changes that we have. Because I just deeply believe that if we can equalize caring at home, everyone will be better off. Our families and our households will just have better relationships with each other. More respectful, more loving, more intimate, more connected when you're truly sharing and co-parenting.
Totally.
And we'll have much better workplaces because we'll have happier people coming back into the workplace. Like the mornings that I drop my daughter off at school and we have a really awesome chat about what's going on for her in the car, and then I come into work, I'm much better place or better mindset than I would have been otherwise. Or just as a small example, but we'll all be better off when we can do that. So my magic wand is equalizing care from the very start, and all of the system change that needs to happen, and all of the mindset change and sort of culture change that needs to happen around that.
That's a big magic wand.
That's quite a big one.
Yeah. Equalizing care. I love what you said, Joe. Actual innovation in HR sort of job design. like actual innovation.
Yeah.
We actually need actual innovation.
We have such a low risk appetite when it comes to people
Yeah.
decisions. You see this in recruitment too, and often in the workshops that we do, often it's, oh, but we just really need a safe pair of hands, or we need someone who can hit the ground running and all that. And so nothing changes. You get the same kind of style of people, same technical background, same around job share or part-time. You go, oh, you hear these conversations in organizations all the time. Oh yeah, I can see, but would that really work? In our system,
Yeah.
And so there's not that real courage to actually disrupt the way that we're designing.
Yeah. Yeah. As I always say, you can't think your way out of a pickle. Like, we might actually need to do things differently, And I also loved your story, Joe, around this freedom or different mindsets around caregiving and for dads, and how much you enjoy the chats with your daughter when you take her to school. And I also want to offer up the contrary opinion that taking my children to school was often the worst part of my day. Because they never wanted to go, or there was a fight, or I had to go in and read 40 million books and wasn't allowed to leave, and then was late for my team meeting. But anyway, that's just a therapy session I had for free.
I think it's a valid point though, Emma, because it's not just the good stuff, right? It's not just the stuff that men will enjoy that we want them to be doing. It's all the shit stuff that women get lumbered with as well. So I had a conversation with my father-in-law the other day where he was like, well, I just don't enjoy cooking. I'm like, no, nor does your wife. She does it so you don't starve. And I think there's this concept that a lot of the crappy work, like the ironing and unloading the dishwasher and the washing and all the stuff that nobody wants to do it, but it often falls to the woman to do it because otherwise it doesn't get done. So I think that's the opportunity as well, not just the fun stuff, but all the stuff that goes into making a household run. How do you get equity in that space rather than assuming the woman will pick everything up because that's what they've done for hundreds of years?
That is totally agree, Jess. And it's success for me that we have equity in the boring Groundhog Day stuff, and that we start the curiosity conversation around that stuff. Like, oh, really? You have to enroll someone in primary school 6 months before they start? What, you have to get a JP to sign what is JP? I mean, all this kind of stuff. And just general negotiation. I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment, and I talk about how when your children get nits or head lice and how much time that sucks out of your day, particularly if you have 3 children and you've got to comb through their hair every night for about 3 weeks. And we need to talk about this boring work that is a caregiver. That is boring, It's not just hopping in the pool on Saturday morning in your togs, but there are lots of good times, I'm assuming. I don't know. No, there are good times. Thank you so much, Joe and Jess. This has been a fantastic conversation. If someone is listening who would be really interested in talking to you about Mobilise for their organisation, how do they get in contact? And I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Fabulous. Well, we're both on LinkedIn, so you can look up our names, and we've got a website that talks a lot about the program and has some kind of experience on there direct from men who've done the program, and it's menasallies.co.nz.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
This podcast was funded by Works for Everyone, a business that is dedicated to supporting working parents and to smashing the motherhood penalty. If this is also your jam, let's stay connected. We're on Facebook and Instagram. Just look for us, Works for Everyone. And if you want more information on how we help businesses put a care wrap around their employees, check us out on worksforeveryone.co.nz. Or if none of these work for you, in the weekends you can find me, Emma McLean, the founder of Works for Everyone, in the queue at Pack and Save Royal Oak or Kmart St Luke's. Onwards!